'Cause on giant shoulders I see a giant who gave his life for me. On those mighty shoulders he bore my sins for all the world to see. Yes, on those giant shoulders I pledge my sword to him who has set me free. For you're the giant's giant, the king of kings, and a solid rock for me.
Good evening and welcome to the Book Distillery, the place where blue-collar scholars distill and discuss books that matter. We started last year during the lockdown with Norman Davies' epic tome. Anyone got it with them? 1,000 pages of The Isles, where we looked at Britain from the margins. And very kindly, the boys agreed this summer to look at my book, Saving Europe, which explores the lives of two Christian thought leaders in two very different dark ages. Joining us tonight is Richard. Please wave to us, Richard, or just flop your hair. Thank you. Richard, the man who speaks more languages than C-3PO and straddles more academic disciplines than Dr. Spock. Philosophy, theology, history, physics, psychology. Richard is the man who puts the poly into polymath and is essentially the godfather of the group. Welcome, Don Riccardo Coglioni. Next here is Ben. Ben, who graduated in politics and philosophy and economics and now works for a media company. And unlike Richard, managed to get a haircut during lockdown. Ben, you are heartily welcome. Next up are the two sons of thunder, the brothers Andy and Jeff. Andy's the math graduate who now works in, I've just lost what I'm supposed to be reading, a math content creator, Roman history aficionado. Brother Jeff, aka Lord Business, is just finishing his MBA at Warwick Uni and is also a singer, poet and writer. So guys, you're heartily welcome. Finally, or not finally, but last joining the group chronologically was Dr. Harry Moyse, another math prodigy who specialises in and now teaches digital artificial intelligence. Harry's real genius, however, what is it? He said he persuaded Hannah to marry him this August. So Harry, you are right welcome. And finally, but certainly not least, is Harry's friend, who's our special guest tonight. Sam joins us from Pakistan. He fulfilled his parents' dream when he came to the UK to study law in London. He has been an atheist, a Hindu, then radicalized as a Muslim radical, and then de-radicalized. And strangest of all, in his long journey of faith, he's found himself into the Book Distillery. For security reasons, he won't be sharing his video feed tonight. He has been involved in local politics back in Islamabad and in import and export business. And he, gentlemen, is most heartily welcome. Please give it up for Sam. This is how we're going to run tonight, because it's a long chapter. I think it's about 20,000 words, so we've bitten off a lot. For those of you joining us on YouTube, there is the introduction has been read on my YouTube channel, Saving Europe. What we're going to do tonight is Richard is going to give a 1-minute summary, and then we're going to jump in with what people like, what they found helpful, useful, new. And then in the second section of that, we'll find out what I missed as an author, what was wrong, what could have been better. And then hopefully all of this, with this, your input, will be going into the second edition of the book, hopefully out later this year. So I thank you for your help, and let's jump in. I'm going to hand over to Richard, who's going to give us our summary. Thanks, Rich.
Well, Henry's book is about Christianity in Europe and the Christian impact on the European history. So the first chapter is basically looking at the ingredients that go into the cake of the formation of Europe, seeing the Roman Empire as the main cultural source of the European story and the thing giving it its shape and momentum and its languages. Is chapter 1 basically starts at the beginning of human civilization and look at all the different elements that led up to the Roman Empire, so that by the end of the chapter we've ended the Roman Empire in the West and we're ready to pick up the story in chapter 2 with an Irish saint, St. Columban.
Good. Fine. Okay, boys. You may let rip then. Part 1 of chapter 1. Let's hear your thoughts and comments.
I'll jump in first, if that's all right. Because there was a line in your introduction that I thought was worth making reference to. I appreciate that our age demands specialization, but it also desperately needs synthesis too. I think that for me was coming from my educational background. That was such a lovely thing to read, because it kind of dawns on you at some point in time that you're not going to be able to read everything. You're not going to be a master at everything. And I really appreciated that sentiment. I thought that was a really nice way of putting it.
I think I borrowed part of that from Norman Davies from his book on Europe. So, to be accused of dilettantism and superficiality because you have the chutzpah to straddle between things you don't really know, but you're just grasping out. And that confidence is probably, partly born, I think I said, out of some kind of childish delight in the subject matter. Yeah, but that does, people have got to take you generously, I suppose. That's what I'm trying to say, particularly if you're sticking your head into other people's disciplines, and you can't, no one can. Only Richard probably is the only person I know who can be as well read as the specialist in every subject. So,
That's
which
rubbish.
is, God brought you into our lives, Richard, to teach us humility, and it's just wonderful to have.
I learn a lot whenever I speak to Richard.
Just
Another line from the introduction, actually, that I thought was quite nice, which I think could almost be like a little caption for the Distillery, actually, is that you said your intention was to create a basis for further dialogue, not entrenchment. And I think, that's something I'm quite looking forward to as we go through this book in the series, actually, is, not only discussing the history and the interesting things that we've found, but then actually what does it mean for us today? What can we learn from, and how can we kind of progress that dialogue as we're looking into Europe of the 21st century? I think it's a really exciting project. So yeah, the introduction for me just kind of got me really kind of fired up, and it felt like my brain was clunking into gear. So yeah, quite looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's cool.
Oh, I like all these comments on the introduction. I love your metaphors. You said the display you saw about the Enlightenment as the source of the European project. I love that, because you were saying that's far too recent. It reminded me of the Chinese general who was asked in the 20th century, what is the significance of the French Revolution? And he said, well, it's too early to tell. We've only had 150 years. It was a wonderfully Chinese comment. And you said, this did strike me as strange. It is rather like me pointing to a cake that is just coming out of the oven and exclaiming, look, that oven has just made a cake. What it's doing is taking us back to much deeper roots. And I think that's really important. There's so much modern history is so superficial, simply in the simple sense that it just doesn't go nearly far enough back. So I think I really like the project. Sorry, that was the introduction, not the chapter 1.
So also jumping into the introduction, I yesterday went through the introduction again because I read the first chapter a couple of weeks ago, and it really did strike me, the whole introduction, because you are just pointing out and categorizing and bringing everything into a small little box, and just saying, this is the context. We want to zoom out from the politics or the this or the that or the position we're in, and just take a step back and get the whole context. Because there is Europe and there's the EU and there's all these things, but let's just step back. So you kept going phrases with perspective and context and the bigger picture and all these ideas you kept bringing back. So that really did strike me, the importance of getting the whole idea of everything that's going on, not just the thread line of our little bit of history out here on the fringes in this little island off the coast of Europe.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off that right into chapter 1. Page 22, I underlined a quote which was Clarke wrote that we often mistake the byproducts of civilization, liberal democracy and fine arts for the substance of it. We confuse the icing for the cake, which also came up. And I think, I don't know if anyone can relate out there, but I can definitely appreciate that for many, many years, I didn't appreciate in the context to which I spoke and lived and whence that came. So just to add a final exclamation point onto the importance of history and tracking back the themes that deep rods into the ground do provide deep foundation.
Absolutely. If I can jump off from that, Ben, as well. There was a point, I'm not sure if it was actually chapter 1 or it might have been in chapter 2. There was a section where you were talking, Henry, about sometimes if we're trying to protect like those superficial, like the visible elements of a culture, maybe that's an indication that actually the rest of the culture is already dead. If you're trying desperately hard to maintain the ruins of a castle or something, then the castle's probably already ruined. You've probably already missed it. That was quite striking to me, actually. And I'm a paid up member of the National Trust, and I enjoy that kind of thing. But it did make me think, actually, perhaps there's something to that. That chapter 1 of going really far back into our history to see, okay, is there something there that we can learn for the future and for the next step? I thought that was really interesting and important. It underlines as well, like, the importance of actually knowing the history and looking back into the classics for some of it as well, actually. I thought that was a really cool, really interesting point.
Yeah, I may have used this today. I may have used this actually in the book. I think I did, but I was talking to an actor friend, Toby Gaffney, today, Richard, and we were talking about, and I quoted what Chesterton said about one of his larger-than-life characters. He said he never spoke about the books he'd written, but only about the books he was going to write. He was too much alive to just talk about the past. He was always going. And that vital spark and that confidence that you see, let's say, in Renaissance Florence or in Victorian England or at other times, that is something, you don't get it by chasing it. That's the thing. You get it by chasing something. And that's sort of, we're all entering in. Let's keep it going.
I like the fact that you, building on what I quoted from the introduction, you said very near the end, at the end of chapter 1, that you quoted a French historian. I like the fact you're quoting non-British sources, and you said European civilization was the fertile convergence of Jerusalem, Athens, and Rome, a thing in itself that and I like that, because you're so much Western history since the Enlightenment, because you're really going against a bad narrative. You're not just saying going further back, you're looking at the diversity of sources, and you're saying basically, if all we do is go back to Athens, and say, wasn't Athens wonderful, clever Greeks, we're completely missing what's really formed our civilization, and Greece was just an element. I mean, my background is history and philosophy of science, and if you just had Aristotle, you'd never get to what we call science today. There were elements that came from the other sources, especially from Jerusalem, in the sense that you have to have the Jewish, the Semitic input. And a lot of these narratives were created in a time in the Enlightenment when it was fine to be anti-Semitic, and writers tended to be generally racist, but specifically anti-Semitic in Enlightenment times. And I'm sensitive to that because I'm part Jewish and I've studied the Enlightenment a lot. So, and the Jewish element, the Semitic element in Western civilization is really formative, really important for our science, for our politics, for so many other things. And so I was glad that you pointed to that. I mean, you quoted Augustine's City of God. I thought that was the obvious place to go, and I'm glad you did. And because Augustine says precisely that. The whole book is built on the premise of saying that the future of this civilization, collapsing civilization of Rome at the time, Augustine says, is from those three sources. The Romans have to acknowledge the Roman roots of themselves, and the Greek sources that have inspired Rome, but also the Jewish input. Is not saying everything's got to be Jewish, because that's the principle of Christianity. The principle the New Testament's built on is the convergence of Jew and Gentile. So I loved what you said in criticism of that narrative about Athens, because you said, I loved, absolutely relished your political comparisons. You keep comparing ancient history to contemporary history or recent history. And you said ancient Athens was not a nice place. It was a place of unimaginable misery, except for the fortunate few. It was a dystopia on a par with anything imagined by our science fiction writers. And I thought that was great, because people read Plato these days very complacently. And Plato's not, he's the best of a bad bunch, really. But I like Plato very much as a writer, but I'm well aware that he's sitting on something very unjust, that there are slaves at the foundation of that society, and it's the same for all the Roman writers. So I love what you said about, I can't remember your metaphor, I'm not going to look it up while I'm talking, but the idea that the Christian idea of the image of God and the dignity of man came in like a wrecking ball to destroy a lot of assumptions of classical thought. That if all we had was the Greeks and the Romans, there's no way we get to the civilization that we value today. Yeah. No way, it wasn't going to happen. On their own, we would have got Hitler. So it's. I think it's important to point that out.
Yeah, back to those, the inequity of that society. For every one citizen in Athens, there was, I think, is it 1 or 2 down the Laurian mines? But also looking how that rebounds on the society, and how people in Attica, only kept their property for like 2 generations. It was, there was this. So you can't live like that. But this is our ancestors.
There was a brilliant theologian I was into in my 20s called Walter Wink. I've probably mentioned him to you all at different times. And I repented of him later, but he influenced me deeply. And he made some brilliant comments about classical civilization. He said that there was a sense of depression over the whole civilization, over the society, because of the oppression of people within it. That something in the human psyche knows that it feels guilty, irrationally guilty, because it knows that what it's doing is wrong, because it's building on the oppression that we're standing on someone. So the Greek and Roman elites that wrote the books that we've got, and that were the generals that did the conquering, the guys who appear in the history books are the apex of a pyramid. It's not as bad as the Aztecs, but it's not pretty. And I think it's important to bear that in mind, that we are post-Christian, and therefore we've already absorbed the idea that everyone has rights, equality of rights. That's radically biblical and not radically classical at all.
Now you're all rushing on, and none of you have mentioned sort of this Lebanese girl and Zeus.
Europa.
What is going on there? What's the matter? This is like sexism on a massive scale. Can we not go back to this Lebanese girl? Anyone got any points?
White men.
Yeah. What about this girl? And any thoughts on this movement west and this unusual? About Minos, the Minoan civilization. Anyone?
Sure.
Any thoughts on that? Come on, Harry. You're being very peaceable there, and Sam, you're allowed to chip in if you've read it.
Well, I read a few passages through the text because I did not get enough time. But according to my understanding, whatever I grasped through it was that whatever Christianity says is actually wonderful.
I'm happy with that summary.
Of your religion are wonderful. The trend of forgiveness, love, and care for each other, it's just amazing. There is no other religion like it.
Who's dropping Smarties in a pot?
We're getting a little bit of weird sound. Hallelujah. Thank you, sir.
But Christianity is good because of Christ, not because of Christians, and that's important. When we say Christianity is valuable, we're not saying, as many American Christians are today, Christian civilization is wonderful and we're right and everyone else is wrong. That's not what we're saying, as this is for public consumption.
Yeah.
So, this is a fascinating thing, the story of Europa riding the bull. So that there's this fascinating root of this myth into history. So it's interesting, like the representation of the Minoan civilization as the bull, and of Europa in a sense as this woman being carried on it to the consummation at the river. But in a sense, in my mind, part of what's going on in the myth, if we are to view the myth as a metaphor for history, the bull in some sense also represents fate or something like that, because it does seem like, I don't know, there's been this incredible story bubbling up underneath Europe that's been carrying European culture and European civilization to a place that maybe we would not choose, but is nonetheless very interesting.
And also, I've just noticed this. that it shows our roots. I mean, and philologists will say this. I'm actually reading Melvin Bragg's The Adventure of English at the moment, and how Sanskrit, is formative in these languages of Northern Europe. And this lady, this archaeologist, is on page 18. I only found that sort of late. Marie-Nicole Pagerat. She found there were monkeys in the frescoes in Minoa that must have come from the Indus Valley.
Yeah, I love that. That was a good piece of cultural archaeology. Yeah.
So
I'm very in ancient history, because I'm digging into ancient history at the minute, Henry, doing my history of psychology, and I'm looking at the very beginnings of, in the 3rd millennium BC, and just after writing's been invented, and I'm more and more seeing these clues of intercultural communication, that there was an awful lot of crossover going on.
That's a theme that keeps coming up, actually, isn't it? That, even though Britain might be an island, no man is an island, in the sense that, any of the European cultures, if you look at them in isolation, and certainly the whole European culture, if you think of it as a group, is very influenced by, obviously we've talked about Augustine of Hippo from Africa, we've talked about, art featuring creatures from the Indus Valley and so on, but Lebanon, the Middle East, there's all sorts of flowings to and fro. And actually that's a really important point, I think, to highlight, and that comes up a lot in this first chapter. I find the Minoans fascinating. They seem kind of mythical, so I watched Aquaman recently, and this might be too much of a tangent. You might want to chop this one out, Henry, but
it's an appalling movie.
I enjoy it because of its ridiculousness. Yeah. But yeah, like that kind of underwater civilization. It's very, it's all very, very kind of like that, isn't it? But there is something strangely echoey about it that that we can't quite reach there. We can get our minds back to Athens and stuff because it's that much more relevant and closer to us. But if we start reaching back to the Minoans, it's quite hard, I think, because they're quite remote. No, I thought this bit of the chapter was really interesting and some stuff I didn't know.
I mean, just think, you could have gone there and found running water in the bathroom. You wouldn't have that in London till, not even in the George's time, in the Victoria, so just those things were lost, and those townhouses they lived in, you'd have recognised. But I love that it was their necessity. They had their agricultural surplus. This one's for Ben and The Economist, and they didn't have the metals that the other islands had. And in some way, there's a picture there of of international mutuality, cooperation, trade leading the way. And that's been a big story actually in our language, I noticed from reading this Melvin Bragg book after having read The Isles with you. So yeah, I really found them interesting, and I would love to go. I spoke to someone yesterday who'd been on Crete recently and really had a good holiday there. So
I'd love to go there.
Let's do a book club tour, broadcasting live from.
That would be great.
A taverna in.
Saeed, you'd have to come as well.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very, very generous invitation, Henry. Thank you.
Saeed, you're not invited unless you bring us a monkey from the Indus Valley. We're going to repopulate its ancient,
There are a lot of monkeys over there, especially where I live.
Great.
Okay, come on. Scootle on. What have we got next?
I liked your. I've got various quotes that I'm going to pinch for my books because I think I really like you're very quotable, Henry. And I love the one where you said, "Impious though it may seem to secular ears, it was not on the battlefields, but in the monasteries and churches that European civilization was formed, consolidated, germinated, and later exported globally in so many different facets." And this idea that the monasteries and the life of the churches was formative for Europe it's just fact. And I've been fascinated by digging into this stuff, because if you read Victorian or Edwardian historians, they assume this, but of course we think they assume it because they're in a very Christian church-going civilization, so they just assume that they're important, that's important. But it's just a matter of fact. They were good historians. If you look at what happened, in the time span of your book from Columbanus or the end of Rome to the 20th century, those people like St. Francis of Assisi jumping massively on, or Dominic or Benedict especially, are hugely formative. that these alternative societies are they create a model. There was a wonderful example from in the 4th century, Basil the Great, one of the Cappadocian fathers in what's now Turkey. Basil created a set of hospitals, kind of invented the hospital basically, and created a therapeutic community for people to be healed and saved and looked after just physically, as well as spiritually. And there was a town next door, and so all the people from the town started going, because they wanted to get better, or their relatives to get better, to Basil's new town. And so what began as a sort of hospital community, a sort of large hospital community, a village, grew and grew and outgrew the original town. So that was a metaphor for the civilization, that the ministry of Christians is bringing a whole new, the healing love of Christ into this dark, pessimistic, oppressive Roman world. And what happens is the alternative outgrows the old. And I thought it was quite a prophetic model of what happened, that the old pagan empire collapsed. Eventually even the East collapsed 1,000 years later. But what replaced it was, and this is Augustine's vision. I've wondered whether one of the keys to Augustine's city of God and his idea of the city of the world, the city of God, city of the world going down into hell, city of God going up to heaven. I wonder if, Basil's community might have been one of the metaphors for Augustine, but it's a really good, the idea that the monasteries are important, and the nunneries, so the fact that women had a vocation as nuns. We tend to disapprove of that since the Reformation says sex is good, this is bad. But actually, in its context, it was a work of God. Monasticism was a very powerful thing.
Yeah, we do actually come across Basil later, by the way, so you'll get a little glimpse, because he was a university contemporary of Julian, the Emperor Julian the Apostate, so he's quite an interesting guy. So, yeah, Ben, you were going to chip in.
It ties into what we were saying in the introduction about how the reading and studying of the peoples that came a long time before us and kind of getting a sense of the trajectory, as it were, and even that acknowledgement of that Christian ideal, you put it, Henry, that it was the invention of the human being as we currently conceive them, and how that's new. I think that ties into that kind of reading of history from peoples to now. I mean, even considering that in terms of the way that the West has adopted it and the way that our judiciary system works, the way that our legal system works, I kind of wanted to go on from that point to kind of this discussion of empire as a whole. Because we talk about the Greeks, we talk about the Romans, and I found it quite moving, even just reading the account of the shock of peoples of the fall of Rome. And also just thinking like this is an 800-year-old empire and institution. I mean, just even getting my head around that and that just ending and being something that was once and is now not, I found very moving. And there's this quote here that you talked about, but my English entrepreneurial nose is with Bill Gates. Every penny we invest in places like Nigeria to produce stable and flourishing societies will take us 1 second further away from a catastrophe that would otherwise ruin us both. I think that's important because you draw a comparison to kind of the European project. You make reference to our kind of confidence in the society in which we stand, in the Western world, in Western economy, in Western value systems, and how, in the same way as Rome lasted for a long time then fell. It was quite interesting to think on that a second. And also this idea of addressing inequality as an extension of the importance of the individual, every individual, wherever they're born, whatever they look like, whatever language they speak in.
I mean, we're talking about huge issues of which we've only got I've only got a scratching of knowledge. So it is very complex. But, I'm thinking about, we talked about John Ruskin, because Harry was talking about Ruskin University there. Ruskin said there is no wealth but life in all its fullness, and that man is richest who, having perfected the functions of his own life, is able to have the widest possible beneficial influence over the lives of others. And he gives a great big thing at the end of his political economy. He says, our infertility problems in Europe, our 1.6 fertility for 30, 40 years, shrinking demography and expanding sub-Saharan Africa is like...
Well, I'd like to contribute in that. That's a big issue. In order to protect your values and your traditions and your religion, you need to be more towards having more convenient family life, have more children, so that they can promote your values. That is why other people are coming in and teaching Europe of what to do and how to do it.
Very good.
Yeah, and this might be a complete departure from the historical narrative, so we'll see if it ties in or not in a way that's worth using. But I heard someone reflecting that the birth rate falls as the economic development rises, as GDP rises per person, the birth rate falls dramatically. So when the economy is stable and people earn a living, they should stop having less children, which we notice in every Western society. So that addresses two things. One, the fear of overpopulation is kind of actually, as economic development continues in developing countries, we'll see the birth rate drop quite a lot and we don't need to worry about it. But I've not actually heard that reverse put forward about what does that look like from a falling birth rate in developed society.
It's worth mentioning that the calorie intake in sub-Saharan Africa now is greater than it was in Portugal in 1960 and Britain in 1950.
Wow.
So, absolute poverty is shrinking, something like 160 million a day. So there is, but then I would say there's more bent to the narrative about fertility than economics. I think there's ideology and a lot of other things embedded in why people have children. So, China's just reversed the one-child policy to the two-child policy. And then they've got the three-child policy now, but it's having not a jot of, having no, and of course, yeah, anyway, that's another massive, we said we'd talk about ancient history, come on. But yeah, I did slip that in about those things because, you just look at it and I just made the point that it actually, the Minoan civilization, proto-Europe in a sense, was destroyed by pressure from Africa, tectonically speaking, that caused the eruption at Thera. And now we have a sort of a pressure from the south driving dangerous trends in terms of populism. And, so it is complex, but it's just trying to make it relevant. One historian said that most of the mischief in history writing comes when we try and bring too careful parallels to the future. I forget who said that, Rich will know. But there you go. So let's not be, just be circumspect anyway. And
So to give another point, in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not covet is included. I think the danger of wealth disparity is covetousness. So, when everyone has an Instagram that shows everyone's wealth to everyone else, it invites something very scary. And I think that one of the things that we're called to do in walking humbly and loving God is being willing to see people who have more than us without wanting to steal what they have. And I think it's a wonderful thing that modernization has reduced absolute poverty. I think it's a terrible thing that academics, many of whom I know and I've worked with, are encouraging covetousness and saying, look, they have so much, you have so little, you should riot about that, you should start protesting about that, you should start voting about that, because my goodness, covetousness is not going to bring about a utopia.
Yeah I think we could riff on that all night. Sorry, tangent.
Harry, I'd be interested to chat to you about that.
Richard, no doubt, is going to rebut me.
Inequality of wealth has led to a lot of problems, especially in the underdeveloped world.
Agreed.
I was saying that I loved Sam's point at the beginning about the trajectory of Pakistan and how he felt that something had been brought to India previous to the partition, so India and Pakistan, that was brought from Europe, and it wasn't the things that were specifically European. Like I was saying earlier, it wasn't the Greek and Roman bits actually of our combination. The ingredient that was really helpful for his country was the Christian part, and so that was the thing that Europe was qualified to export. And so what's happened is, I love what he said, that although the British Empire had its problems, there was a sense in which it had trained the subcontinent in values that involve rights for everyone, equality and those values, and that and honesty of dealings. And he was saying that the level of corruption's gone up because, what's left over. So I just felt that it was like what he said about Pakistan is a microcosm of what we're saying about Europe, that there's, on a much longer scale, on a much longer time span, what Henry's book is saying about Europe is what Sam has said about Pakistan, that there's the arrival of a new value system which brings reform and life and health and many good things. And then the loss of that value system, the decay of it, in Pakistan, just in a couple of generations, in Europe over a few centuries, has also led to that deracination, that loss of the defaulting back to bad models, which didn't work before. So I like the fact that Sam was speaking from a contemporary context, because I thought it was quite a good model of what Henry's trying to say about Europe.
Also, we were just before the podcast talking to Sam about it. I was recommending William Carey's book, an 18th century missionary. One of the things that's interesting there is you show a poor man from England, I mean, as poor as you can get, doing and his relationship with the East India Company. So that's his relationship with trade, his relationship with the colonial governors, and him being in the middle as this Christian missionary who ends up bringing such wealth in terms of, he was a great botanist in forestry, preaching the gospel, building schools. He built a university, and I've forgotten the name of it. And so that, just to show the complexity and how sometimes the East India Company were like, totally against everything he was doing and blocking him. And then sometimes there'd just be an opening and things would work out. And then Arthur Wellesley, Duke Wellington, was actually a really good governor, helped him ban sati, helped him ban that other practice where people wandered into the Ganges because they wanted to be cleansed from their sins, and so they basically committed suicide, and offering children to the tigers on the banks of the Ganges too. I think that was another thing it's sort of an interesting interplay between law, justice, economics. William Carey, brilliant. And he almost doesn't miss a beat. That's what I was going to say. He just seems to be following Christ as much as any missionary that I've seen in history. So
he was such a wonderful man that he even helped one of the Indian freedom fighters in their cause to get freedom. Like, he was there is a whole Indian movie made on it. It's named Mangal Pandey. I wish you people might see it if it's dubbed in English. He was great friends with the local people of India, and he really helped them in order to achieve of what they wanted to. But unfortunately, I don't know why the British left. It's such a misery. They should not have left us alone.
Well, self-determination.
Let's rebuild that bridge.
Okay.
Just looping the conversation back a bit, if I may, Henry. I love the quote. So it's this page 35 in chapter 1. So it's jumping forward a little bit, but it was a Gardini quote where he says, "There's only one standard by which an epoch can be fairly judged, and that's to what extent did it allow the development of human dignity. The medieval achievement was so magnificent that it stands with the loftiest moments in human history." And I think we talked about this bit, I think, already, but that view of humans as having worth, and all humans as having worth, women and children and the sick as well. That's profound, really profound, and quite unusual. The fact that it's in the same paragraph, actually, page 35. Nietzsche mocked the Judeo-Christian God as the God of the sick, actually that's one of the things that has actually led to it having the impact that it has. That we've talked already about hospitals and schools and so on, but that view of actually with not throwing sick children away like the Spartans did and so on, but actually caring for and treating people with dignity and respect. That's a hugely profound thing. We see that trend right the way through. But just highlighting and underlining that point really about human dignity. To what extent have societies actually promoted human dignity? And I think there's an awful lot of cultures that we look at and say, oh, they did these great things. Look at their great columns of stone, or their great plays, or their poems, or whatever. But actually, how did they treat people? That's a much harder yardstick by which to measure things. I think Richard wants to riff off that.
Remember one thing, my friend, there is a wonderful part of British history when Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, alongside with their British counterparts, fought with them, along with them in the Second World War. No one dies for someone who they hate. There were some values which led them towards that. They were just common villagers, common people, but they stood by their British friends because there was something good in them.
Yeah,
Rich, you were going to say.
Two things. What Jeff had said about Christian values and their impact. Henry, I loved a paragraph. It's on page 38. You said, "Perhaps it does not appear so momentous to us now, but by his example and his teaching, Jesus delivered to us the fully formed concept of the human. The moral, spiritual, intellectual, and social implications of just one or two lines of Jesus' teachings were so revolutionary, so seditious even, that they threatened the fabric of the ancient world." I love that. You know, the idea of the Beatitudes, say, you know, in the Sermon on the Mount or something in John, Christ is saying something that threatens the fabric of the ancient world. It reminded me of Daniel's prophecy that there would be the series of empires leading to Rome as the great monster, and that the rock would be carved, not by human hand, that's Christ, would be thrown at the statue and smash it to pieces. I loved this idea, Henry, of just one or two lines of Jesus' teachings just caused a revolution, like a wrecking ball to the values of the classical world. I love that.
There's a couple of things. There was, and this is kind of tying your point and Jeffrey's together, because you talked earlier about the scientific revolution. So if you want two pebbles, in a sense, that brought down the Goliath, not bringing things down, but that made the difference, that brought, one is that we call it in Latin the Imago Dei doctrine, this made in the image of God, and therefore that is where the dignity, that's where the, you know, everything, the rights as human rights spring from. That's one thing. And the second is the doctrine of not a creator, but a transcendent creator. So there's, you know, he's outside the cosmos. He made everything with laws, and we are like him. And when you've got those two things together, that puts you in a position where you might go looking, you know, you might have the chutzpah to think, well, maybe I could figure out the laws that are, you know, hidden in the electromagnetic field. Or, you know, when Michael Faraday, a beautiful, godly man, Christian, died, he said that I, a poor man, and he was dirt poor, I was given a chance to look into to glimpse behind the universe. He couldn't believe it, and God gave him probably the best mathematician of any age, James Clerk Maxwell, to work with him to produce 4 theorems. And Faraday wasn't a great mathematician, but that's the story about friendship and just God's provision. Anyway, so yeah, it is. I wanted to emphasize it. And do you know what? It's something that comes back over and over again in the book. Because, of course, as we descend into the chaos of Soviet communism, Nazism, Nietzsche, you know, you realize what you've lost when you chuck out that biblical view. You really start to feel it. And, of course, we feel it now every day. Could I ask Sam you something? Because it does reference, I think it's maybe this chapter or the next one. Part of this is that in the Christian view, we believe that we're made in the image of Yahweh, the God of Israel. We are made like him in some very, very deep way. And I said in the book that as far as I understood, a Muslim would not say the same about Allah, that he was made in Allah's image, in the way that he was like Allah. How would you read that from your perspective?
Well, in my perspective, Muslims believe that Allah is a superior force. He's the creator of this world. He created us all, and we will be judged by him. We are not his children, but we are his creation. Whereas in the Christian faith, what I've come to know is that Jesus was the Son of God, and he was created in the image of God, and we are the children of God. And we are here to serve each other. Well, in a way, there may be a few similarities in between the two faiths, that despite the fact that Muslims don't believe that they are created in the image of God, but still they believe that they are the children of Adam and Eve, and they're here to serve the people. I don't know what kind of people have hijacked this religion. They just provoke terror in the name of religion, and they are the ones who need to be discouraged of what they do in the name of the religion.
How does it? If I mean, remember Jesus sort of encouraged us to actually refer to God as.
Honestly speaking, I love Jesus more than my own prophet, even though it's a sin in Islam to compare in between the prophets. As Muslims, we believe that Jesus was a prophet of God. He was born to Virgin Mary. He will come back and he will save us all in the end times. And even in the Muslim tradition, if you read out the texts, it says that all Christians, Jews, and Muslims who are holy will be saved by Jesus Christ. It doesn't say that they will be saved by Prophet Muhammad.
I should like to, if you could put a link, is that in the Hadith?
Yes, it is in the Hadith. It is in the Hadith that during the last days, Jesus will come from the sky, and then all his believers will unite in his name. And I'll find the exact texts and then I will forward them to you.
That's very kind of you. Okay.
There's one bit that I just wanted to say,
Go on,
which
Jeff,
I think
knock it on.
I think this ties in. I think that this will help us sort of segue from one segment into the other, actually. But it was really just sort of tying everything together that we've already had, and it comes just before the quote that Richard read earlier. But it's page 36, and it's a David Bentley Hart quote from The Story of Christianity, where he says that the story of Christianity is not merely the story of a religion indigenous to Western civilization. In a very real sense, it is the story of that civilization itself. And I think, you know, if we try and view European culture as a secular entity in and of itself, discrete from the religious history, we're missing out on a huge thing. And actually, you know, I think that one of the good things about this book is that it doesn't just look at the one or the other, but actually the melding of them both. And I think, you know, as we're kind of in a post-truth age, looking at all those different factors that go together to make what is a culture, that's a particularly helpful stance to take, I think, and it'll flow on into the next part.
Yeah, thank you. So we're always trying. I think
I'm sorry to intervene over here. A wonderful thing that inclines me more towards Christianity is that Jesus never killed anyone. He never fought a war. Instead of fighting, he gave his life on the cross for our sins, which is such a wonderful thing. One can't even imagine such a holy man who gave his life for this whole world. And he never fought anyone. He was tortured. He was crucified, but he did not utter a word, and he accepted the reality. It's just amazing. And whereas if you compare it with other faiths, I would not like to name any. It's a totally different story.
I'd like to expand on that. This might not necessarily be for recording, because it's a very Christian point, but just off your point there, Sam, that it just fascinates me that the amount of times that feeling of any hero that you have turns out to be very human and very flawed. They're just time and time and time again. They're riddled with fear. They committed this atrocity. They did these amazing things, yet in the background there was this. It's just every single person that comes out, you just get disappointed when, they could have handled that better. They could have, and just the idea of the man that didn't, the man that went through the legal system, that was accused of this, that, and the other, that didn't respond out of unnecessary, unjustified spite, that preached good messages and didn't just say, do as I say and not as I do, but actually to the T followed those principles. There just didn't come a moment where he was found out, and just for some reason I marvel on that, especially when just even the fact that the messages that were spoken by this man were backed up with an integrity of the highest moral fortitude. There is no fault. You're not exhausting anything that doesn't need to be exalted in that act.
Amen.
So,
yeah.
Hey, Harry, I would like to tell you a wonderful thing that you people might not know.
Sure.
The head of John the Apostle is buried in Syria, and it's in the Umayyad Mosque, which was ruled by the seat of the Umayyad dynasty, and a lot of Muslims go and pray over there.
I did not know that. Mm-hmm. Just to expand Ben's point, so this was something that, Plato, I'm trying to remember if it's the dialogue with Gorgias. I think it is. Part of the conversation is about what the perfectly just man will look like. And there's this passage which I think some Christians will be familiar with, where there's a description of the things that you were discussing, Ben. And it's famous because it's a non-Christian prophecy about Jesus. So it describes this man who is perfectly just in all of his ways, but is rejected and stays true to them and doesn't do anything evil in return. And on top of that, he is flagellated and finally crucified. And if you're reading Plato and you haven't been alerted to the presence of this, it's like whoomph! It's like a lightning falling from the sky onto the page, because what you've said is so crisp and so actual. And it seems when you read that and you do an analysis of what might be going on there, is that Plato or whoever is able to get this just by thinking logically. That is the pinnacle of what a man can be.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That's Andrew, go on then, chip in. Sandy, let them drip like honey from your mouth.
Yeah, so in that whole context of looking at Christianity and Jesus and the very, very different way of doing things, the almost completely upside down kingdom that he puts forward, he brings himself as a king to the world, but it's completely different from anything else that the whole world has seen before. You said even a bit earlier, page 24 in your book, that the Greeks and Romans were very religious, and Egypt, the Minoans, across the world, everyone's been very religious. You quoted from T.S. Eliot saying, "No culture has appeared or developed except together with a religion. According to the point of view of the observer, the culture will appear to be the product of the religion, or the religion the product of the culture." And so what we're seeing in this entire context of what we're discussing is that these influences that European and British cultures have had on each other and on the wider world, Pakistan, India, across the globe, the setup of the freedoms in the American Declaration of Independence and their constitution and other constitutions globally has been because of the fundamentally different, alternate, opposite kingdom and setup and thinking and ethos that Jesus has put forward in the Christian religion.
This is the 33 AD to 400 AD. That's the decline of Rome, the survival of Christianity, and the arrival of the barbarians. Talking of those long-haired barbarians, I think Richard has some family just turned up from the south, so he's temporarily out of the picture. So come on, you guys, let's hear about this. This is about the Christian Revolution, how it impacts, what that does to Rome and how that affects Rome, but also the other titanic forces that are swirling around Rome economically, strategic security threats, etc., migration, climate change. So talk about it. What did you learn?
I mean, this was just my recollection from reading it, is that you describe peoples, of course, Roman Empire's booming and having a party, and as with anything, it attracts interest, and so the people groups to the north, to the south, want a part of that, and so integrate. And the other point that comes to mind is this kind of mingling of cultures, which is one doesn't become necessarily Roman and one doesn't become barbarianized, or the value systems change. There isn't that clash. There's kind of this adoption of both from each side is the things that I recall from that chapter.
People have made a lot of that, as you can imagine, because there's real resonance when a culture loses confidence. So yeah, that piercing, that sundering of the Roman legal system, and then Wergild, it would be a bit like, having Sharia alongside our own jurisprudence, our own British common law. That's a kind of...
Whoever says that Sharia should be implemented in the UK is the thug of the highest order. Deport that rascal back to where he came from.
Thank you very much. So, but that was something that was happening, and this started to, on the frontier, it began to be. But don't forget, first of all, there was economic decline for 200 years. The rich behaving abominably, I didn't.
Yeah, none of these things happen in a vacuum, do they?
Yeah.
There's all these other things going on as well. Something that amused me was that Enodius mocked a fellow Roman, called him Jove, for wearing a Roman cloak but sporting a Gothic beard. And I was just thinking of our hipsters today. There's a few of us with beard. In fact, I think we've all got some stubble on at the moment. But there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, it's learning how to, as you know, I've just released.
There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, it's learning how to, as you know, I've just released those episodes of the documentary in Pavia, and you really see there how the next, in the 6th century, how people like Boethius, how they become kind of Chancellor of the Exchequer under the Goths. It's not like the Nazis and the Quisling in Norway, but it's like adjusting to the New World Order. You've either got to get on, and yet the Goths, as you see in their own turn, want to be like the Romans. Theodoric says, what kind of Goth would want to be like a Goth? They don't want to be like Romans. Only a poor kind of Roman would want to be like a Goth. And it wasn't that they'd come to break up the empire; they'd come to enjoy it, and they did come to escape calamity.
Actually, it made me think of, the Angles and Saxons and Jutes, and then the Vikings, and various other people like this. And it made me kind of think of actually, the sort of the way that we see that impacting the culture in this country, with Danelaw and things like that. Actually, similar kind of comparisons happening. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of interesting things in this chapter. I'm sure the other guys have a lot to jump in on.
Come on, boys.
One of the themes that comes up time and time again in this chapter is kind of the forgetfulness of what it is that brought about the culture in the first place. And so the emperors towards the end of the Roman Empire, there's a vanity in their projects. You mentioned about heading west when there were all threats from the east, and you used this wonderful phrase that was referred to in the first part of this recording, which was rearranging the chairs while the great ship went down. And this kind of idea of trying to preserve the things that the empire produced or the culture produced, as opposed to the truly valuable structural pieces.
I think it's called the Thucydides trap, isn't it? It's about the civilization gets rich, you become lazy, addicted to luxury, and this is the interesting thing. And what was the Christian response as this is happening? Because it's taking 200 years of slow decline. And then also, of course, what's growing, of course, is a privileged state cult of Christianity after Theodosius in 380. But don't forget, Theodosius ruled from the east, not from Rome. Rome was, in a sense, a forgotten backwater. And what would be the correct response as the ship's going down? Because there's probably not a lot you could do. You can see what perhaps not to do when you examine how the rich pilfered the buildings and how special royal executive decrees had to come out to stop the rich plundering the civic structures. And also, of course, you've got the Redemptores, and they bought back Romans from the Goths, the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, and then they enslaved them on their own lands.
Awful.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm just kind of thinking is linked to this, Henry, is how when one of the pillars of society, I suppose, when one of those things goes, the rest of it tumbles as well. Odoacer giving a third of Italy to his army. If you have a coup, then who's going to replace that? What's going to happen? There's lots of just sort of, as soon as you remove one of those kinds of things that helps keep a society together, actually the rest can kind of very, very quickly come out of kilter. And so you're talking about the issues with financial structures in Rome and the economy there. It's a big issue if the capital is not self-sufficient. There's just all sorts of other problems that come with that, aren't there? But to me, there's loads of issues in this chapter, I think. And we talked a little bit in the last segment. Actually, I think we jumped ahead a bit about Augustine, but I thought it was really poetic, actually, kind of Augustine of Hippo there on his deathbed while the Vandals are beating on the door. That really kind of struck to me, actually, and it seemed quite symbolic, and I think you highlighted that in the chapter.
Yeah, and do remember, in the last 2,000 years of European history, people have literally thought the world was ending. Gregory the Great was absolutely sure. Around about 580, 600, it's going. It's just all over. around 1500. You can find Botticelli paintings. He inscribed on the back of one of his paintings, and he burnt a lot of his art, actually, Botticelli. They were expecting the end of the world. So there's this apocalyptic thread. Everyone's sort of jumping the gun. But Augustine actually sounds a sort of slightly different note to the rest of them. I don't know if you've got Jerome's quote somewhere. He's kind of very apocalyptic about it all. But Augustine holds this steady line, and it's greatly to his credit. He doesn't evacuate unless all the church could go with him to get to Egypt to escape.
Could we talk a little bit about culture? Gibbon quote on page 45 about Ausonius. And how I haven't read much Ausonius, to be honest, but the little bit I have read wasn't that great. The fame of Ausonius condemns the taste of the age. That things have gotten so bad that you've even got a really bad poet being sort of made poet laureate or whatever.
It's sort of like BBC.
It's reminiscent of a modern era.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't like to say.
I thought you were going to make a sort of thing about BBC comedy being the least funny thing that's possible in the world at the moment.
Quite possibly, yeah. But it does. I'm not sure if you could take comedy as a litmus test of society or not, but maybe you could.
I think
culture
so.
as a test of society, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he wrote. Do I say it here? But I think he became a consul. I mean, that's serious. But in an unhealthy society, these aberrations are going to appear normal, and what is healthy will look exactly what it isn't. So if you tell the truth in certain countries,
they shoot you.
Yeah, so yeah, go on. Yeah, do you want to go on that? Keep going on that.
It's interesting that we're looking at sort of the 500s and them moaning about the fact that it's all going downhill, the world's imploding, the Roman Empire is crumbling, deteriorating. But it's funny because my reading of Roman history is that they've been complaining about that in the Roman Empire for several hundred years before that. The century before Jesus arrived on the planet, all the politicians in the Senate were discussing about why the number of children they're having is going down and the army isn't being as good as they should be, and the morals of this high society is just up in arms. Everyone is arguing about it. So the whole empire of Rome is just sort of falling apart morally from the inside. So when other people from outside, the Goths, are looking in and saying, "Ooh, we want some of that. We want to move in and join this empire and be part of what's good about this," it puts this external pressure at the same time as these internal pressures, and the whole thing is just going to fall apart at some point. And it does. Almost the remarkable thing about Rome is not so much that it declined in power, but why did it stay together for so long? There was so much going on.
That's a very good thought. I forget which Rocky movie in it. There's a restatement of Thucydides' principle, which is Rocky's personal trainer tells him it's very, very hard to get up early in the morning and run when you sleep in silk sheets. And furthermore, when you fight this young guy who's hungry, who's like the barbarians at the gates of Rome, he's going to kill you. And he's going to kill you because he's precisely what you used to be, someone who was hungry for the things that you are now satiated by.
Yeah, so back on page 43, you mentioned, you've discussed political and financial issues, and I was talking about moral ones as well. But you then move on to a section discussing the political and military issues. And one of the major things that comes up again and again, I think you mentioned this earlier, Henry, about the fact that at some points, the military people, the Praetorian Guard there in Rome, would actually just sell the empire, the highest position of authority to the highest bidder. I really enjoyed reading I, Claudius. Towards the end, somebody is taken and picked up on the soldiers' shoulders, and they decide he's going to be emperor. And he's just sort of sitting there thinking, I don't want to be emperor. Bring back the republic. This isn't what I want to happen. And he has no choice. They make him emperor. So just the whole situation is falling apart because the emperor is kind of in power, but just he's thrown out and assassinated so regularly. It's fighting against itself as much as other things are coming against it.
Average of 3 years for each emperor.
Yeah, within the 70-year period of the 3rd century, Rome had 27 different emperors, only 3 of whom reigned more than 5 years, and 23 of those 27 died unnatural deaths.
Is that me or is that you, Jeff? That's me.
That's you. Yeah.
I've got it here. Yeah, page 43.
Yeah. So
and actually,
very undesirable job then. If you're that's
a direct parallel for this, everyone, and you'll get it later when we get to the 3rd and 4th French republics. Is exactly that. It's like something like 104 cabinets in 70 years, something like that. Just absolutely unbelievable. So the instability, and it's put down to essentially, they call it la décadence, and you'll get that in full. So this is serious cultural calcification, rot in your the depth of the tooth of the culture. Yeah, really scary stuff.
You want to jump in there, I think.
Yeah. So it's a really fascinating cross-cultural phenomena where people metaphorically win the game of football by destroying the goalposts or by burning the league tables, because of course each time you win it and become emperor, you make the seat of emperor less meaningful, and you destroy the institution. And the inversion of this which is so fantastic, is King David, who is anointed as king and then refuses to have a revolution at every moment that it's offered to him, so that the institution can be preserved.
Yeah, brilliant point. Brilliant point.
So that whole period of the crisis of the 3rd century in those 200s kind of comes to an end at around 284 when Diocletian comes to power, and he tries to do that sort of thing. He tries to rejig the Roman Empire and change the whole setup of there being one person in power with kind of all the power, but if we just knock them off, then what happens? Everything goes haywire. He tries to rejig it by sharing power and putting 2 people in a position of power. Kind of harking back to the BC era, BCE if you prefer, era of the Republic, when there were two people in power and they share power and take it in turns, or each one would hold the other back, kind of like a house of cards. If you've got 2 leaning against each other, it stays up, but as soon as one of them disappears, it ain't going to stand at all. So what Diocletian tries to do is he tries to set it up with 2 Augusti, 2 people in power and 2 people in training to be co-emperors later on. But still, it doesn't work, because people in the next generation come on and want to get into positions higher up the hierarchy sooner than is proper.
So yeah, they're not new problems, are they? Not new problems. Anything else? Any shocks as we get into the 40s there? 40 just looking at these, living under the Wergild system, things like that.
It's a pretty horrible system, isn't it? To try and put value on a human life. We still struggle with that to an extent today, actually, don't we? I'm studying business at the moment, and one of the things we've had to think about, to what extent is there a pay gap, and how do organizations get away with paying people who are doing the same work different amounts? What's that about? Is it because they're a woman? Is it because of this? Is it because of that? Pervasiveness of the badness in human nature can come through as well. Wergild system and stuff like that. It's not great.
Yeah, again, you'll see that in the next chapter, actually, or the next 2 chapters, certainly. You'll see it with the birth of the eugenics movement. And if you haven't got that bit yet, I hope that will utterly shock you when you read what was avant-garde and what was in Britain at the first eugenics council. And this slightly Hobbesian, basically it's a Hobbesian view, isn't it? Yeah, the fact that we have this kind of the moral standard, or the revolution that Jesus brought, is amazing. The fact that we don't live by it is, not amazing.
Natural.
Yeah, just that shouldn't surprise anyone if you know your own heart.
Or the work of Satan.
Yeah, but I mean, just the work of my own sinful nature warring against what God is trying to rebuild in his people. So we kind of believe his power, his resurrection power, is at work in the believer to transform them from this vapid, silly, selfish, bitter clod into a miracle working.
Amen.
You know what I mean? That's amazing, isn't it? That's just wonderful.
It's interesting. It's just interesting how these things repeat themselves. Like to Jeff's point, it's not half a century since that was law, that unequal value were counted differently by census based on completely irrelevant characteristics. It's the same thing 1,500 years later. It's fascinating.
May I suggest that it's so the idea of people being equal has to be axiomatic. So you can always look at people and think, oh, Fred is taller than Bob, or Julie has more useful skills than Bernadette. So the difference is always apparent, but what's always unapparent is the potential, the unseen potential in each one. And I think that's part of what we mean when we talk about the Imagio Dei, this idea that on some strange level, the unknown in every person, even if everything we know about it says that Jeff is better than Andy, the unknown makes them equal.
Which we don't believe, Andy.
No, Andy, you're amazing.
I mean, one of the things that you might, I don't know if you've seen the episode on Reichenau. There was a guy called Herman the Lame. I know Jeff saw it and liked it, and Andy saw it. He couldn't speak, he couldn't dress himself. At the age of 7, his parents just had enough, gave him to an abbey. This was in about 900, I think. And he literally became the Stephen Hawkings of the Dark Ages.
I can well believe it.
He spoke Arabic. He translated mathematical treatises. When he was too blind at the end of his life, he literally all his life someone had to dress him, and yet he was this extraordinary mind. And he ended up writing music when he was blind. But Herman the Lame, look him up, Herman the Lame, and he was surrounded by Nocta the Stammerer and Strabo the Squinter. So all these kind of guys with these physical defects, these untouchables, these Dalits that would have been like extinguished in Germany under the eugenics program, and probably in America, and probably in England. Even now they would be. There they became these complete marvels of academics, and a real blessing to Europe. So there you go. But then again, I'm also saying that I'm also commodifying almost what they did. Of course, what we're saying actually is their value is even deeper than that. It is something, their value is spoken by God. He has included them in his creation. We know that we're fallen since Eden. We're all manifesting frailty, bits that are wrong, in different areas, disability in different aspects of our, and yet he says, you're worth it. I'm going to make you a son or a daughter.
I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to go to bed now. I've got an early start tomorrow.
Yeah, that's fine.
God bless you all. Speak soon. Bye.
I've got 4 points.
Oh, good lad. Go on then, Jeff.
So this might be a tangent. We might not want to include this, but this is page 46. So it's the Alistair McIntyre quote about how the barbarians aren't waiting beyond our own frontiers. They've been governing us for quite some time. It's a lack of consciousness of this that constitutes part of our predicament. That whole kind of, you call it alarmist and pessimistic perspective, but I think there's something quite prescient really about being aware that not all threats to a culture or a nation or a group are external, but that actually more often than not it's some form of corruption inside that leads to tragedy in the end. Just a separate point really, but I liked the quote, the Hemingway quote, about the character who was asked how he went bankrupt, and then he said, gradually, and then suddenly. And I'm kind of picturing a bit like if you think of like a dam that's about to give way, the water keeps piling up and piling up and piling up behind it, and then eventually all of a sudden it just goes, and it's swept away like that. And I think you could look at things like the decline of Rome, or the destruction of an organization, or all sorts of things, and it's often the sort of incremental things that keep piling up, and you can't see, if you were asked while you were in the middle of that piling up stage, oh well, when's it going to go, or has it gone, you wouldn't be able to say that. But then afterwards you can be like, oh yeah, no, well, you can't pin it down to one specific point, actually, that you can, from this point it is no more. But at what point did it really kind of reach critical mass? That follows with I think we pick it out in the later chapters of the book about there's no Sovietologists, there are such things, that could really predict what was going to happen in Russia. It was so slow, but then when it went boom, it was just like boom. Now slow then fast. And we're looking at Rome, such a juggernaut. And then we look at ourselves. That's the other thing, using McIntyre's Scotch pessimism. It's hard not to be pessimistic, frankly. So. Oh yeah.
Okay, go on,
Andy,
then.
I think you were going to jump in.
Go on, And.
I don't know whether this would be better before or after Jeff's statement on the final quote, but just that last page, just leading into the following chapter, where we're going to be zooming in from this picture of the whole of Europe and jumping into this little bunch of islands on the top left-hand corner. And it's just interesting to see that flow of history, that there's this tiny little island somewhere in the middle of the Mediterranean, just south of Europe, that you started from, that really surprised me. Just sort of, you look back in history and we talk about the Greeks and the Romans, but you started down here on this little island of Crete, and with Europa coming across from other places. And now we're moving further west again.
Yeah, I like that. I was trying, that's how I kind of introduced Abraham, this idea of everything going to the west, which it was a narrative device for me, but of course it is there. It's not that civilization was embodied in Ireland, but they did have something, as we'll see in the next chapter, that there was when they got when they got the Christian story and it mixed with their own culture, it made a quite an unusual
impression.
Yeah, because they didn't get Roman culture. They just got the gospel, and they got Patrick and a few guys, and it wasn't all like they got the pure gospel, because they didn't. They ended up getting a lot of Egyptian monasticism through the life of Antony that Papmonius wrote down, and Athanasius, and then. So they were getting. That's where the sort of asceticism of the Irish comes from. But you'll see that's a spoiler, really. Was that Jeff wanting to close with some magnificent flourish of rhetoric?
Well, maybe not so magnificent, but so the Roberts quote at the end of chapter 1. So this is page 53. I won't read the whole thing, but it's talking about how people, particularly Christians at the end of the Roman Empire, for them that was all they'd known, and so to separate out the end of the world from the end of Rome or the Roman Empire was a very, very hard and maybe impossible thing to do. The assumption was that when the Roman Empire fell, that would be the end of the world, and that would be Judgment Day, and Jesus would return. And so actually to then see that, oh, Rome's gone, but the next bit hasn't happened yet. What do we do now? It's a huge, big question, and something that's quite challenging, I think, for many cultures and many ages. But there's a Socrates quote: "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." And to me, that's quite a nice way of looking at it, that rather than looking at tearing down the culture that existed, trying to, just sort of destroy other people's worldviews or just sort of tear down bad things, actually having something positive to replace them with, or something to even just sort of set up as separate that can then subsume or grow more around it. That's really quite beautiful. So not just tearing down the old, but focusing on the new, and bringing some good things from it. I'm looking forward to chapter 2.
Yeah, that's exactly it. and that's that's what I've given, in a sense, this book, or half this book to, and no, the whole book. It's to those unexpected possibilities of renewal that McIntyre actually will talk about. He talks about that. He says, quite unexpected what you find Benedict, what the Irish are doing. It's quite unexpected. And if you looked at the geopolitical scene of World War II, Adenauer, Schumann and de Gasperi, that is unexpected. And there are miracles happening to bring that about for that period of time. We don't know when our day's over. And so we mustn't go weeping like some of those guys in the 5th century. We must think, well, we need new institutions. We need to. So that's a good one, Jeff. Yeah, not always fighting a rearguard action. Let's look at, how we go forward and survive under perhaps totalitarian regimes, because that might happen to us. And so there's lots there. Thank you, guys. It's been a long one. But I will clip it down these 2 hours, and I'll clip them down to one
Thanks
hour.
a lot for having me in. I feel so much better after.
Oh, it was a real privilege to have you, Sam. Thank you.
Good to meet you, Sam.
Yeah.
Have a good night. Bye.
Yeah, God bless you, my friend. God bless you.
God bless you too.
Remember also
Okay.
that this journey was part of the research for a book which uses the lives of Columbanus and Schumann to explore the unlikely arrival, survival, victory and atrophy of European civilization. Do follow the links below to find out more. Please let us know what you thought of this episode, what you liked, what you didn't, what was new to you. Just start a conversation below in the comments section. And of course, if you found the content helpful, then we're pretty sure you're going to like this next one suggested here. But also, while you're there, don't forget to help us by subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.